Przez cały rok w przyszłość wybiegała redakcja architektury. Wokół tematu przyszłości właśnie ogniskowały się główne artykuły, które były publikowane w architekturze. Teraz czas właśnie na krok w przyszłość i chyba najbardziej wyczekiwany punkt dzisiejszego wieczoru, czyli dyskusję panelową, debatę z udziałem wyjątkowych gości. Stoimy bowiem wobec licznych przewartościowań i wyzwań, czy to społecznych, czy politycznych, czy wreszcie klimatycznych. Świat zmienia się bardzo szybko, jeszcze szybciej na naszych oczach i pytanie, dokąd zmierza architektura, jak jesteśmy przygotowani do tych zmian, jakie trendy uczestnicy panelu widzą w obszarach, za które odpowiadają, czy są one zbliżone w różnych miejscach świata, czy są podobieństwa, jakie są różnice, jaką misję widzą przed sobą uczestnicy panelu, jak widzą wyzwania współczesności i jak może na nie odpowiadać, jak powinna na nie odpowiadać architektura.
Good evening. I'm very honored to be here with you all and happy that I can run our conversation, which will be dedicated to the future. On Sunday, the 20th of July, 1969, American spaceship landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong, the first man who stepped on it, said, "That's one small step for man, but one giant leap for mankind." At that time, people believed in progress. 50 years earlier, the architects of Bauhaus believed in progress too. Can we believe in progress today? This is a question. What is our vision of the future? How many futures do we have, if any? Can we still measure the space with the steps? So I would like to talk with you in this subject. Actually, it's quite interesting that yesterday was the 30th anniversary of the very visionary movie by Ridley Scott, The Blade Runner, and the vision of the city, it was the vision of today. However, the world doesn't look like was on the movie, but I would like to start our conversation maybe with the small steps and giving the question to Marta. I would like to ask you, what is the evolution? What are the changes in the role of the architect for future? If you could say a few words.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organization. Congratulations on 25 years of the magazine. I have to say that the answer to that question is not small. I think that's a huge step. If we look at where architecture may be going and the changes in architecture, I would have to just start opening by saying I think we're at a time of a great revolution. It's a revolution as big or bigger than the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 19th century. Because now it's not only technology, but it's urbanization, it's global warming, it's migration. And the world, on one hand, is getting smaller and smaller. It has the positive side that we can communicate a lot of information, but it has the negative side that these changes affect all of society, and they're very profound. At my school in Madrid, we like to say that we educate people by expanding the role of architects and designers to be relevant for the 21st century. So rather than go into, perhaps we can have a quicker debate between people, I would say that the traditional role of architecture, as we may have understood it in the 20th century or 19th century, is one model of architecture. I think today there are many models, and not only are there many models, but there are more and more agents who are becoming involved in the field of architecture. It is no longer the realm only of architects, so architects have to be ready to expand their role, or it will become an irrelevant minority.
Yeah, thank you. So from this question, from your answer, it comes another question. Maybe this will be the question to Denis. Strelka, can I skip?
Thank you.
Strelka KB is described as the collective of young professionals hungry to transform their city and country. Is it possible to have an influence for effective decision on the city development, working in the form which is offered by Strelka?
It's the, of course, the influence is possible. It's a question of the level of this influence. Yeah, and I mean, you never knows how small step can be a big step, as you coined before. Yeah, in this case, I do think that, yeah, we should at least try, and also we do understand that this step or this influence, it can't be just in a field of architectural practice, so we should work much more widely, and even by profession among architects, I do understand that to solve the challenges of today or the future which we have, we definitely should be much more instrumental and should search for answers and questions also in economy, in geography, in climates, in ecology, in a lot of issues which are really helping to make these changes. It's not only about the question of space.
Yeah, but I also have a question. What do you think, to whom the public space belongs nowadays, from your experience from Russia?
Oh, I think that's depending from, in general, the core value of the public space is a communication. And the way how we communicate, it's transformed a few centuries, but initial values of this communication, they're still kept. So in this case, I see this as a kind of the nodes in the city network, which interconnects the different new ways and levels of the communication. It can be a question of mobility, it can be a question of visual communication, it can be a question of the media communication, the internet communication, so on. So we need to update all the time our public spaces to these new types of the communication on one hand, on the other hand, keeping this value, that of the possibility of this open engagement of any parties to present themselves and to communicate on the space.
Okay, thank you. So now is the time for Ivan, who runs the very important foundation in Barcelona, as you know, dedicated to the modern art and contemporary. So I have a question to you, Ivan. Is it possible to be modern again, or we have to stay contemporary?
Okay. That answer is going to be even longer than Marta's regarding the future. In any case, I think that something that probably happened with modernism is that there was a certain sense, we could say, of activism, of understanding that architecture had to be something that could activate society. And so when the prize, in this case, is called Mise van der Rohe, but it looks at contemporary architecture, it understands not the modernity of the architecture that the jury is judging or so on, but it's understanding a series of principles. And when we see nowadays that what you were saying, which is so important about universities, which is from where the future of architecture from a pretty important part, and a big part of it is going to go forward. We already see also this, these projects or this kind of activism, not only from students or interest in activism from students, but also from some of the professors, some of the teachers, and that's what you also then see in the debates and the discussions among juries. And so this is what finally, I think, is one of the points that makes contemporaneous important, or something which is real, and which allows us obviously to look towards what you were speaking about, which is the next steps or the future.
So maybe another question to Marta. Being executive director of Pritzker Architecture Prize, given for achievements, what is the relation, once you give this prize, with the future?
I think talking about the prize, I think it depends who wins. And of course, the independent jury makes the decision completely on its own. And when they choose an architect or architects at the end of their career, I think then it's just a symbol of the values and or the ideas of that person or persons. We can look at some in the recent past, for example, Frei Otto, who won the prize and unfortunately passed away before he received it at the ceremony. But he could be seen perhaps as a beacon of sustainability, of the idea of touching the ground lightly through architecture. On the other hand, when the jury selects an architect who is much younger, as in the case of Wang Shu or Alejandro Aravena, or even the three architects from Catalonia, who are in their 50s, I believe. I think the prize is talking about the promise of the future. And again, if we look at the jury citation, we see what is important to in terms of the message. So in the case of Aravena, it was taking a place at the table, at the political or economic table. In the case of the architects from Spain, it was the idea that you can be local and universal at the same time. In the case of Wang Shu, I think it was trying to, from what I recall from the jury citation, it was trying to see a future China not completely devoid or divorced from the past. So it depends on who they choose, and it depends on the citation and the message they want. At times, you know, and as executive director, I don't give an opinion to the jury. At times, I would like them to be bolder about the future. That would be my own personal wish.
Thank you for your answer. So I come again to Denis, and I ask you, are there any visions for the world, for the poor people?
Pardon, for the world?
For the world, of the poor people. Poor people.
Poor people? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, being in Moscow, you know, beside of the, I've been a couple of times, and beside of the, you know, richness of the street and luxury of the shops, main shops, I saw also quite many poor people being around. So when you making these projects on the streets and public space, the question is, what about them? If you in your
okay.
thinking have this on mind.
I'll answer like that. That's in my personal belief. When we do public infrastructure, it doesn't matter. I mean, is it schools or it should has quality higher than general private infrastructure. In terms of that's we should feel ourselves in a city as citizens who can be proud of this space. And when we talk about public spaces or affordable housing, which we're also working on, our educational facilities, for us it's not about the beautification or this architectural quality, but it's about how these spaces can provide or can help to provide better quality of life, not in terms of only in the comfort, which is partly important, but it's in a way of safety, in terms of equality of access to the spaces. So that's for us the important issues. And by the way, with the program, one of the programs which you mentioned about in Moscow, what we see actually, it's not about how to make glamorous environments, but if you make a good public space, it's move out the luxury. It's strange, but it moves out the luxury and became for the middle class and for the low middle class, because these spaces start work on the floors and it moves out luxury. So actually a lot of projects which we did, one of the biggest protesters was about these luxury facilities, because you can't drive with your car directly to the space, you should walk and so on. So it's good public space, democratized society, and actually increase the amount of people who are using the streets. And we see that also with the tests which were made after that, it's in few times increased the amount of people who use them. And I don't know how it's in Warsaw with the climate. Winter, when we talk with all politicians and say people don't walk on streets in winter. People walk, they like to walk on the streets. And it should be fully accessed for sure. So we don't care if people use water from fountains, if they can sleep on the benches. I think this is city and it's okay if it's used.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add something, I think this debate about public space is so important. And again, looking at it from a broad sort of worldwide view, if we see the strife that is happening in cities from in Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Spain, France, and Paris, maybe I have a naive point of view, but I think it is much more the public space, the quality of the public space, that will be the future of the city. We cannot, if you ascribe to the idea that a lot of the tension in city today is between the haves and the have-nots, and a lot of the protest is because of inequality, which may or may not be true. I happen to believe a lot of it has to do with a feeling of oppression or being aggrieved. The only place that pertains to everyone, or that can pertain to everyone, are public spaces. And there has to be a variety of public spaces integrated throughout the city. And Ivan, you can speak to this in Barcelona. There are, at the time of democracy in Spain, one of the first things to renovate the city was through public space. And I think it has a hugely important role in the future. I think infrastructure does too, but maybe that's another question. But I think public space is fundamental.
But if I may, I think that I'm going to connect two things. One, the first one that you were asking about, which is modernity and contemporaneity. We speak about modernity. We also think about trying at that moment to avoid a certain inequality. So to see that everybody could have certain things that everybody could have. So trying to, I don't know how to be a bit more equal, which is also something that I think right now is being discussed. So regarding public space, Obviously, it is a space which is different in Europe from other parts in America or in Asia. We see that the use of this public space is different. It's kind of observed, or Europe is observed on how it has been developing this public space, but it's also different depending on the countries. But it's also one of the big challenges that we have in the future, because it's also the place where obviously there's communication. There's communication in the physical public space, but also in the digital one. But at the same time, you also have all these challenges regarding touristification or gentrification. And so, although it's true that they are spaces where everybody is supposedly allowed to go and enjoy and so on, at the same time, it creates both certain, let's say, challenges again, or certain problematics, let's say, which does not mean that they continue needing to be developed and very, very well designed.
Yeah, and in general, if we talk about the future, I see, from my point of view, what's one of the, if you can say, trends, what we see is that there is a big shift from object to space. That's in architecture, and more space and environment became more and more important than the architectural object as a volume.
Yeah, but the question about the public space, which I gave to you, Denis, was also related with the weather. Because I think it's much harder to work out the public space, the context of the city, in the colder country, when half of the year it's cold, snow, and windy, than in the countries mentioned by you, Marta, when you mentioned South Latin America and Barcelona. So this is harder work in some way.
I can say that there is a big myth that people don't use public space in a, let's say, harder environment. It's also a question, what is a hard environment? And to whom? In a way that one of them was always were fighting that people are never in the city, in the parks in the summer. Why? Because they're all on their summer houses. Nobody used them. When we start doing the parks, I mean, they were full of people. Then there was another one. No, okay, summer is okay, but nobody use them in winter. I mean, it's cold, you prefer to stay on your flats, nobody work. When we start making the program for the winter, we found that people love to be in the public in the parks in the winter. Same was that people don't walk on the streets. They would drive the cars and so on. So it's just the question of how you design more than I don't want the climate change and then, or climate quality and not climate itself. And the last thing is that even, I mean, also there's a lot of, let's say, discussion that, okay, there's 3 months a year, only a summer, or only the sun. So why should we do the public spaces? I mean, if the people have only 3 months of sun in the year, definitely you should do this, that they should see the sun. Yeah, but not. So, I mean, it's completely, I think, in the opposite way. And then it's not only about Moscow. We work with dozens of cities in Russia, and which are very far, far north, or far east north, like Magadan and so on. People need spaces, and the people can feel only that they are the citizens of the city if there are public spaces where they can. And people in much more worse climate, which I think I will not survive. Yeah, I see how people use the spaces if they are designed properly.
But let's not forget that public spaces are not only plazas and parks. Public spaces are marketplaces, they're libraries, so there's many places which can have also heating. And the most important part is that it's meeting, communication center, places to communicate, and so on. And they're so important that private companies, we're seeing it all over Europe at least, which is what I know, are also creating supposedly public spaces, outdoors public spaces, which look like public spaces, although obviously they're private, and so they have their own regulations. And that's the other challenge, to see how these spaces that the city sometimes does not create, but they are being created by other people, by private investors and so on, are used, and which are the regulations and what we can do in these spaces. So really the importance of public space is obvious, I would say, because even the private is discussing about it.
Yeah, so once we are in this moment, so maybe Denis, not Denis, but Ivan, sorry, I would like to ask you about the the role of favelas. Shall we treat it as an inspiration or the subject of shame in the term of our world? Brazilian favelas.
Can I answer that one? There, about one quarter of the Earth's population lives in informal settlements. And the favelas in Brazil, there are many different types of favelas, there are many different types of informal settlements. Absolutely, we have a lot to learn by observing to find out how people have organized themselves. But I think even more important than that, not to romanticize about favelas, what does it tell us about the architecture profession for the future? Architecture, one model is wait for the client or win a competition, design a building, hand it over to the contractor, get it built, then it's occupied. That's one model. In the future, if we really want to have architecture be relevant for that quarter of the Earth's population, which is increasing, we have to figure out an architecture that can work with those people. Not abandon them, not just forget it, but we have to realize not everyone will be able to live in a brand new home. Not all governments will invest money in affordable housing, and certainly they don't have the money or the power to do it. So how are we going to change the profession to, rather than be a top-down architects or architects serving a certain sector of society, how can we redefine the profession to work together, to make it a profession that allows labor by unskilled people, that appreciates the realities of the economy, in this case of Brazil?
Would you like to say something, Ivan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about the actual situation, but in any case, I think it's also a result of a transformation of the planet, of people moving from certain places to cities, and so concentrating population in the bigger urban areas. And so this is also something which has to do with ecology or with the climate crisis, and so with all these challenges which go finally all together. And so resources are obviously limited. But we need to somehow find a way that they can be shared by everybody. And of course, it's not only about, or it is obviously about eating, but it's also about finding shelter, a place to live. But of course, the situation and the geopolitical situation which architecture has to confront, obviously, is very different in each place. So I would not kind of dare really speak too much about some context that I don't know that much about. However, if we look at the context in Europe, sometimes we have to look also at the housing conditions in some places, which are obviously not favelas, because there's fresh water, there's light or electricity and so on, but sometimes the conditions of some of the housing, even social housing sometimes, has been very, very restricted, is very limited, and the conditions are not the ones that should be. They're here.
So maybe once we are in this moment, maybe I will ask you, as you are dealing with such a beautiful object of architecture, the Miss van den Rohe Pavilion in Barcelona, which used fantastic and very noble materials. I'd like to ask all of you, what can be the future material for architecture if the forest will be cut off, when the quarries will be empty without stones? What will be the material the architecture will be built from in future?
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms are already...
In which format?
But mushrooms are already in use. for inspirations to building the minds.
No, they are already doing experiments with renewable energy, of course, wood. But I say mushrooms as a joke, but a colleague and a dear friend, Carlo Ratti, who's head of Sensible Cities Lab at MIT, they have done experiments growing mushrooms that then are pressed into a mold and become very resistant. They've only been able to make a pergola, sort of a trellis. They haven't done a building yet, but that's what people are saying. You know, I say it sort of as a joke. That's way into the future, I think, but it does bring up a good point. How do we understand our buildings? And this has to do with architects and that idea of the cycle of a building, the complete cycle. But it also especially has to do with something that Ivan said, sort of that economic context. The idea that a retail center has a life of 30 years, that is no longer viable. That's no longer viable. We can't think of a building with a 30-year life. And so there are many other issues about longevity, about flexibility, and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to kind of say, okay, if I have no answer, I would say the human brain, so thinking. But in any case, I think it's the same thing that you're saying, Marta. It has to do with reusing the materials that we have right now. So there's already a built environment that can be used, and there's also materials that constantly can be changed into others. So there's a lot of research going on into how to use not only mushrooms, but also many other materials, and that after a certain life cycle, well, again, cyclic, and so on, they can be used in other ways. I'm not sure I don't think that there's going to be a magical material that's going to kind of, a specific material that's going to solve the ecological problem.
Would you like?
I think in general, maybe it's not a question of direct what kind of the material, but I mean, we more or less understand, or we think, or expect that till 2030, 2040, we will meet the greatest challenges in ecology and technology which we ever as a humanity met before. I mean, for quite long distance. And we have to find the answers to these challenges. It's about, I mean, the level of the sea rise, it's about the intensity of the rains, it's about the temperature, it's about the CO2, it's about the air. And if we will not answer this, find the solutions for these challenges, probably it will be too late then to answer any, because it's same with the technology. I think we are in the middle of the periods when we see that this Anthropocene of the technology go away, and technology probably will exist even without our not relevant to human being, and they probably will be live quite independent life. Also, it's drastically changed the environment which we live in. This means that the global network of cities, and you just mentioned that most of us or all of us will live in the artificial environment quite soon, also approximately this period, 2050, 2080. And we can see cities as problems which generate these problems as technology, ecological change, but also as an answers. I believe that we can find the way how we can and what we should do with our cities on the global network of the city is just to solve these biggest challenges which we ever faced in our life. Materials will come. I mean, this is the biggest issue. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, talking about the future, we have to talk about women, because this is a future. And this is the question to Marta. How do you see the role of the female architect in the future?
I think the role of women in architecture, it depends on the actions we take nowadays. Time is not going to change the situation. Time alone is not going to make women's voices heard. We all know the statistics that in our schools of architecture, more than 50% of the students are women. In the junior positions, it's about 50% or 40% of the teachers. When you get to the dean position, as in my case, there are 35 schools of architecture in Spain. I'm the only woman who is directing a school of architecture. And I say the reason that I can do it is because my school is private and they don't have to go through the structures that exist for public institutions. And it's surprising because you would think that public institutions would be much more open and much more fair and looking for diversity, but their old structures are still quite resistant to change. So I think there are two ways that we can see a change in the future. I think that women are pushing to take their place in positions of responsibility. We're very fortunate that we have women in publications, in magazines, in communication and blogs. They have an incredible role to help other women be heard and be recognized for their talent. And then there's another area, you know, that's on the side of the profession and individuals or education, taking steps to ensure that women are represented on faculty, in bibliographies, in lecture series, in panel discussions. But the other area has to do with diversity in society. And it has to do with being sensitive to the fact that there are many models of behavior in the city. And let me give you one example. If we look at, for example, mobility, we see that many trips are from home to work. And in city X, you could say, oh my goodness, 40% of the movement of people is from home to work. And then there's 10% that go to the store, and there's 15% that take the children to school, and there's a few that go here and a few that go there. So when transportation planners are planning the mobility system, they say 40% go to work. And that's, at least traditionally, is highly male. And that 60% are disaggregated, and that can be women or older people or caretakers who maybe make 2 or 3 trips. You go to the store, you drop the kids at school, then you visit your uncle who maybe is ill, then you have to do an errand. So if we learn how to reinterpret with a more equitable, a lens of diversity, not just for women, but for children, older people, people who are maybe visitors, tourists, if we learn how to open our mind and say, okay, 40% may be computers, but let's look at the 60%. Then I think we can design environments that are much more inclusive and much more accessible for everyone.
Thank you. Would you like to add something?
I think that also this has to do with the city and with designing, and also with what you were saying, what we were discussing about public space before, and it's how it is designed and who is designing it, and taking into account all the people that use it, so that it's not designed only from one perspective. And so that it takes into account ways of using our spaces, our cities. And the other aspect that I just also, because obviously I agree with everything that you've said, and the problematic is real, is there, and the representation is still way too low. But the other one has also to do with visibility. And so there have been maybe not enough, and maybe it still has to be reinforced, but certain aims to visibilize or to make visible certain people, certain women that have outstanded or have been outstanding, at least in the 20th century, if we do not go back before. And so there have been women or architects who have been women who have been obviously making a big difference, a change, and so on, and that during a long time had not been spoken about, had not been known about, and so on. And this very slowly but still is kind of changing. And the most important thing is not only the past, but also those that are working right now.
And this also has to do with changing the criteria, and this is one area where, without getting into great detail in the Pritzker Prize, but if we look at the first winners of the Pritzker Prize in the early 80s, 79, 80, the words that were used to describe the winner was genius. Maybe there was something innovation, but there was a lot of poetry, leadership. And there were a lot of words that were describing what we understand as masculine behavior. I'm not saying all men have that behavior, or but we could consider it masculine. If we change the criteria and we talk about collaboration, if we talk about inclusion, if we talk about sensitivity to the environment, if we change the criteria, communication with the client or with the community, then we will automatically include more types of professional practice within our awards and within our system of appreciation.
Now, if we talk about the future, for me, it's I think it looked like in 21st century, we will live in the woman's world. That's for sure. That we will live in the woman's world in terms of the management, in terms of the ruling the countries, and so I see that this wave will come and it's race and it will happen, and we should accept that. And I know that it's very difficult to talk about that. Even you should be very, you should be very careful not saying something wrong or misinterpreted, because then you're in complete trouble. On the other hand, I mean, you can't feel anything until you experience it yourself. So once, like a year ago, I was in in the interview for some global organization, and they say, hi, Genis. So we talk, and everything was nice. It's a really cool guy. Everything is fine, but we need a woman, so no. And that was the reason why I was not attending to this club. But when you feel that, I mean, that's something. So, but I think it will be more and more. But on the other hand, it's fine, and it's no. I see how women taking position in power in business more and more, and I think it's better for these countries, and it's better for these businesses. That's for sure.
Of course it is. I mean, you can go to studies and see, I mean, if you believe McKinsey, which I don't always, but diversity in boards of directors are more profitable. So if you have men and women on a board of directors, your company is going to make more money. I have to say, you know, it's unfortunate when an individual feels discrimination, especially if you're a man. But just think, if you feel it once, just think of all your colleagues, women colleagues, how many hundreds of times,
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. I mean, exactly. That's when you experience that at least once, you know how difficult it is in general.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, we have 170 people. We are a small company. I mean, we are not 1,000 or 5,000 people. Most of the positions, I mean, sorry, except me, but I mean, are women. we carefully about salaries, and it's became more and more normal. We careful about who should, we have people who met each other in the office and they make kids, and so who then, how go for this vacation. We care about the positions, who lead the projects, and so on. And I think it became more and more natural. It should not be, if for so long centuries it was completely indirect way. Of course, it will be, there will be difficulties, misunderstandings, wrong positions or wrong decisions, everything. But there is no other way than this became normal, that women are leading next century. I think that it will happen, really.
I just have to say one more thing, and I don't want to bore the audience with this because I could talk about this all night. And maybe this is not the case in Poland, but the professions of law, medicine, even engineering are even more advanced than architecture. Engineering, not in terms of the number of students, but once a woman engineer is a professional, she has more chance at advancement. And in discussing with colleagues, why does this happen? Why is architecture so slow? Well, of course, one is the way architects work 24 hours a day, weekends, and that's not good for anyone with a family or a private life. But I think there's something else. I think that architects, we all wear black, we all look really cool. We think we're a really cool profession. We're very artistic, we're very open, and so how could we possibly be discriminatory if we're so attractive and so cool? So I think in that sense, we sometimes have to look in the mirror, and rather than seeing this cool, hip, artistic, bohemian sort of, iconoclastic person who's trying to find a new path in architecture, we have to see that sometimes we're not so different from the standard guy in the suit and tie, et cetera, who worked on Madison Avenue. But anyhow, I'm not sure if it's in Poland. I see lots of very handsome people here, and they look like they're probably very open-minded and wonderful. So I hope we can talk about it afterwards.
When we talk about such artistic climates, let's talk for a while about Luna, the moon. And as in 1970, Lunokhod was sent to the moon as a Russian answer for American visit there. I just wonder, Denis, and I have a question to you, if the outer space, other planets, are direction or destination of human beings?
No, you better talk to physics about that than me, or astronomists. My basic knowledge tells that's the only space which is where we can survive is the Earth. There are physical limitations why we can't go to other universes, and probably next centuries we will not be able. So in this case, this all the time see what is beyond the limit. It's fine, but we are not able to move somewhere else from here, and we have very limited time in our history to really take care of where we live in. Because if we are expecting that we will build something somewhere and all of us will move there, I think it's the biggest mistake which we will have at all. We have a project in, I just mentioned before, Magadan, so it's very north there, and then they have mountains where no one lives in the size of France, approximately, same. So when you are there, to test Mars settlements, go to this place, test it. I mean, you don't have to go to Mars to test. You just go there and try to live there. It's even not possible to live. So in this case, I do believe that, reality is that this is our home. The reality is that we do understand that this, we have this, no, it's Benjamin Britten, who is the terraforming director in Strelka. He has, I mean, he's much, no, he's a real philosopher. I mean, I'm just architect. And he said, okay, few times in our history we changed this anthropocentric vision. So before we think that, no, I mean, I'm simplifying, but that's the Earth is a center of the universe, yeah, and this is so we as a humans are important. Then we understand that it's completely other way. We turn around there. So it was the greatest shift in the mindset to understand that we are not the center. Then when you mention about this first step on the moon, or this photo of Earth from the space, even though it was turned, yeah, so south and north was in different directions, we see again as a center. Earth was again in the mind of the people a center of the universe with this image. So this image make again a big step. Now when we make this image of black hole, we again understand that exists in this universe exists something which don't care about us at all, yeah, and we are out of context. We are not the anthropocentric. We also know that in the solar system there is probably 98% or 98.5%. There is another planet which is there but which cannot see. Yeah, so it's just close to us something which is there but we can touch it. And I think the whole understanding of the universe, of course, will go further and further and further in understanding how universe works, how universes correlate to each other, and so on. But we will observe it, we will research it through this planet.
And you both agree with what Denis said?
I mean...
What about Copernicus?
Yeah. The thing is that obviously research is absolutely important, and it's important to continue kind of finding out where we are, how the solar system is, and investigate as much in terms of knowledge. But the thing is that we are also, or we need to be aware that when there has been money to go to the moon or to kind of discover as much as possible, is because there are there's an agenda, there's a very clear agenda which has to do with economics and trying to find materials that might kind of help in developing certain technologies which are not of the interest of absolutely every one of us right now, but of certain kind of companies or peoples or governments and so on. So the big problem probably is that our intention of, or possible intention of going to the moon is in order to destroy it. So just to find kind of an alternative to what we are already destroying here, and then just go and destroy the moon, and then we can start thinking also on how to destroy Mars, and we can continue like that, never ending. So I absolutely agree, and we have a radical problem here. I'm not sure if we have started, but let's continue kind of finding a way to change things so that it's not that it's not necessary to go to the moon, but that the way that we understand the moon and all the other planets is not because of a need, but of a part of our way of being, our intellectual interest.
Thank you, Ivan. You, Marta?
No, I totally agree. It's not a question of more land. It's a question of understanding what our impact is in any land, and our impact is not just in the city, but it's what we consume and how food is produced, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to say, I have a lot more hope in the power of architecture and design to make what we have here more livable, to have very dense communities that can be enjoyable, that can be places where people are happy. So no, let's stay here. There's a lot of good things here.
Well, and just take into account that between the moon and the earth, we have a garbage can. So there's already a challenge there, and it's not, I mean, not even the moon yet.
But it doesn't mean that we cannot send something or partly whatever. No, somewhere. Yeah, but of course there is some limits. I mean, if there is another sun in millions of light years, I mean, it's just not possible. So let's relax and try to do what we should do here.
Anyway, it's very optimistic and energetic that we all have to work here on the earth, and the responsibility for earth is our responsibility, not they, but our. And thank you very much for your participation in this conversation. It's so many paths which are still open and need interpretations and conversations, but unfortunately we are limited with time. But when we talk about history, I would like to end our panel with a quotation from a fantastic book, The Seduction of the Place, by Joseph Rückert, who is a great art historian, and I have a chance to be his friend. And there is a beginning, the motto of this famous book, which is a quotation from another great man, John Ruskin. And I would like to read you this in two languages, English and Polish, but we will do it using the new technology. So I will save you the problems with my English accent. And let's try.
No man ever knew or can know what will be the ultimate result to himself or to others of any given line of conduct. But every man may know, and most of us do know, what is a just and an unjust act, and all of us may know also that the consequences of justice will be ultimately the best possible, both to OTHers and ourselves, though we can neither say what is best or how it is likely to come to pass. John Ruskin, unto this last 1862, p. 8.
Polish.
Żaden człowiek nigdy nie wiedział ani nie może wiedzieć, jaki będzie ostateczny skutek dla niego lub innych dla jakiejkolwiek linii postępowania. Ale każdy może wiedzieć i większość z nas wie, co jest czynem sprawiedliwym i niesprawiedliwym. I każdy z nas może również wiedzieć, że konsekwencje sprawiedliwości będą ostatecznie możliwie najlepsze, zarówno dla innych, jak i dla nas samych, chociaż nie możemy ani powiedzieć, co jest najlepsze, ani jak to nastąpi. John Ruskin, Unto this last, 1862, strony 8.
Thank you very much for this book.
Bardzo dziękujemy. Marta Thorne, Iwan Blasi, Denis Leontiev, Mirosław Bałka. Dziękujemy serdecznie. Prosimy jeszcze o pamiątkowe zdjęcie.